Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies in Religion at Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California. Before I introduce Professor Ish Ruiz, who is the coordinator of our Latinx Roundtable, he in turn will introduce today's speaker. I have just a few housekeeping details for us. This event is being recorded live on Facebook. We are also recording it for future posting on our socials. We will not record, nor will we post the chat feature. So once again, welcome to CLGS, and I'll turn the screen over to Dr. Ish Ruiz.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We are honored to have a special guest, Dr. Cecilia Titizano, with us. Dr. Titizano is a native of Bolivia, of Quechua Aymara descent. She is currently the director of Latinidad Theology and Ministry Leadership Network of the Jesuit School of Theology of Santa Clara University. She also teaches at NATIS, an indigenous learning community formerly known as the North American Institute for Theological Studies. Her research areas include indigenous philosophies and ethics and indigenous feminist decolonial thought. And she currently serves in Memoria Indígena as an advisory board member and is part of the Comunidad de Sabias y Teólogas Indígenas del Abya Yala. And today, she is with us to offer us an incredible presentation. The title of our presentation is Raices, and it is about reclaiming our indigenous spiritual heritage. I am going to, in a moment, turn it over to her, and then we'll have some time for some discussion among those of us who are present in the Zoom room, and those of us who are joining on Facebook or online. If you wish to participate more interactively in the conversation, feel free to join us directly on Zoom. I thank you all for being here, and without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Titizano.
Thank you, everyone. It is a pleasure for me to be with you all this afternoon. This is a fascinating topic, and it's something that I've been thinking about it for a while. So I was very pleased when Dr. Ish Ruiz sent me an invite and formally invited me to think this more carefully. What I'm gonna do, and let me share my my screen here. I'm gonna put it as a slideshow, but sometimes my computer freezes. So if that happens, I'm gonna have to stop and then keep it in this format. So hopefully that will not be necessary, but let's see. So today's topic is specifically about the Andean region, where I'm from. When we're talking about indigenous peoples, we're talking about thousands of different pueblos, nations, tribes. So in this particular case, I'm going to be talking from an area where I am from. I am from the Andes in Bolivia, from the valleys. In that sense, the area where I'm from is called Cochabamba, which is primarily a Quechua area. And the way we refer to many of us people living in that area, it's as being a Yactamasi, which means that we are partners in the land. So that's from the specific point of view what I'm going to be describing as my understanding of how the Indian and thought, which is very much focused on Quechua and Aymara people, how this topic is being discussed. So I'm going to walk you through a couple specific contemporary conversations, and then I'm going to refer you to a more cosmological understanding and see how that informs the current conversations and complexifies the kind of conversations that are taking place as the LGBTQ plus is articulating themselves in the Andes and throughout the Andean region. All right. So the topic today is titled Kewas, which is a Quichua word, usually, unfortunately, many times translated as maricones in Spanish, and marimachos, which is a Spanish Quichua word referred to women. So Kewas, maricones, and marimachos in the Andes. And marimacho is usually a woman who behaves like a male. All right. Oh, and by the way, the pottery image that you have here comes from the Moche culture, and it gives us very interesting perspectives of how gender relationships were perceived before colonization. I'm going to use a hermeneutical lenses of the coloniality, specifically the decoloniality of gender, as a way for us to make a space into other ways to understanding gender that is outside Western conceptions of how gender is constructed. And also, as you will see, is also opens up the doors for us understanding of how beingness is constructed, how a human is constructed. So when the concepts of gender that became the lenses that they were used in the Indian region, and for that matter, and all what it was the new discovered lands, right? What is Abyayalan, which is a term for the continent that is a land in full maturity that comes from the Kuna people, currently living in Panama and Colombia. So here we need to understand a couple things. The first thing is that the concept of gender as a male and as a female, it's coming directly from Europe. We are assuming that it was already always there, but it's not the case. This was a construction, a Western European construction that was brought to these new lands. So within this dichotomy, you have the male and the women and European women as understood as less than their men, but it's still being both humans, just one of them a little less capable than the other one, more like a child, right? However, when they arrived to these new lands, they encounter other ways of organizing, other conceptions of being, other realities. And one of the major changes that differentiations that they made, and here I'm going to be embedded in depth to Maria Lugones, this Argentinian thinker. She presents us with something very interesting. She says that those genders were only for Europeans, but what happens is that with the coloniality of being as non-humans, the colonized male and female got sexed, but they were not necessarily quite gender at the same time. So what you ended up with is with a heterosexual patriarchy, and that destroyed the structures that existed in government and in the economy and the politics and the religious spheres of other ways of understanding gender relations, and also the role of a diverse spectrum of gender communities. So the image that you have here to the right is a horrific painting. And the reason I'm presenting this with you is that first, that indigenous people were accustomed to be dogged, meaning they send these big dogs to kill them and turn them apart. In this particular case, this group of people here being attacked is a group of an LGBTQ community. They were specifically targeted for this brutal act because of their unique position in the society. So here what we are going to be seeing is when the Spaniards arrived and they are bringing already these conceptions of who is a man, who is a woman, and how gender relationships took place, or who is a male or a female. Then those are the frames that are using, and they're encountering these new societies. And this, for example, it is a ceramic still present to these days. And for example, the chronicler Pedro Sierra de León claims the following. It says that there were prostitutes in all Inca temples, even in those provinces where sodomite practice was not common. Now, those are all categories of interpretation of a reality they're encountering. So what is that he is encountering? He's talking about temples. He's talking about the presence of what could be understood as a third gender people. And in this particular case, they're referring mostly to males. And they're talking, and it's already telling them or accusing them of prostitution, right? And also here you are seeing the concept of sodomite practices. So you're already seeing interpretations of a reality that for them was sinful. Now, this one is it's a very interesting pick of how non-gender conforming people have a struggle, but also they made a space for themselves in the new in a colonized society. This is coming out of a picture in 1974, and it's called La China Morena. What does this mean? La China is a very interesting character. There are this group of dancers. In this particular case, it's called La Morenada, the black ones, that interpret the realities of the African slaves that were brought to the Andes. That's called Morenada, the black ones. That's what it means. But you also see the term La China. La China is understood, it is a way to talk about a female, a sexed female, in relation to what could be understood as a devilish deity. So you do have this concept of La China Morena. So you have a female and is dancing with all this other group. It will take a whole presentation to describe what this group is, how it comes about. I'm just gonna leave it at that and point to the following: that the picture here, her name is Barbela, is a travesti, and is a carnival dancer. So there were spaces, even hundreds of years after the colonization, where they were queering spaces, giving them dignity, and having claiming public spaces for their presence. Now I'm gonna start going a little deeper here, as we're trying to figure it out. Is that anthropological studies, where are they going? Current movements, LGBTQ movements, as they're trying to articulate other ways to describe the presence of non-gender conforming people. And how does it look like within the Indian cosmovision or cosmology? Now, as a background here, I want to give you a little bit of context that I think is important. Let's see. First thing is this. There are multiple positions. One of them is it's been accused to be as an essentialist position, in the sense that they say the following: that in the Andes, and these are there are dialogues among indigenous leaders and scholars. So this is an intracultural conversation. One of them says that the understanding of gender did not exist. That is something that was brought up through colonization and then through Western thought. The other one that is also established is that the primary unity, or this more than a unity, I would say it's the primary existence here is called Chacha-Warmi in Aymara, which is Chacha is a man, Warmi is a woman, so it's a dual complementarity of a male and a female. So therefore, they argue that the concept that homosexuality as such was brought up by the colonizers, that was not something that existed in the Andes, which is not possible. That's not possible, but that's the position. The other voices are arguing that that is not the case, that there were communities, and actually what we have in a pre-Columbus period is they have a much dignified role in society. It was a lot of more expensive conceptions of gender. So non-gender conforming people did have a very good space, and they were very well accepted, that they were not targeted or understood as sinful or diabolic and all the other labeling and the targeting that they were victim with the arrival of the Spaniards. Now, in order to begin to figure out how is that they're arguing that, where is the place? I want to talk about terminology here. Kewa or Kiwa, it's Quechua term, and it's also used in Quechua and in Aymara, so it's a shared terminology. That when I was growing up there, it was translated as a man that was very feminine man, and it had a very negative it was a negative connotation. To be called a kewa, it was called somebody without. It was somebody that was a coward. That it was, but it was not only related to being feminine in itself. It had also other negative connotations, as for example, somebody that doesn't behave the right way, that it's that hits women, that it is a penny pincher, that does not reciprocate the right way. And in the Andes, not being able to reciprocate in a fair way is extremely damaging. It is the capacity to enter and right relationships. It is the fundamental law, basic ethics of existence. So to call somebody that is unable to reciprocate in the same way is a very serious accusation. So you already see here that it's not as simple as to say it never happened, that never existed, or to say, oh yes, they did existed and there was not a problem. It's not that as simple as that. But we also see some very interesting places that gives us glimpses of what we see we have in Quechua and Aymara communities here. And for that, this is something that blew my mind. I did not expect this to be a place for me to go to study this more carefully. I went to ethnomusicology, and what the image that you have here, it is a type of flute, and I wanted to pay attention to the different draws that you have there. You have 4. But I'm going to point it to just the first 2. The big one is called a machu tara. Now, machu, it is a Quechua word for somebody that is a male and is older or fully grown, but mature. And you have the other one right next to it that is called a kiwa. Now, why are they these two together? It's because when they're playing, the machutara plays this type of notes, and the kiwa comes and it plays a very different, sometimes out of tune sometimes, or too high tones, that it might come across as not as creating a little disorder within the music, but in reality, what you see is that you need both. And if that is the case, what are they saying in terms of a machutara and a kiwatara? What is the role there? And why is the same term as kiwa used in this particular case? And what can this term tell us about this very interesting relationship? So here you see you also see some important aspects to consider here. Yes, the two of them come together. The two of them are needed. However, the kiwa is understood to be single, alone. Julia. Julia is a Quechua word. Now, in the Andes, to be a Chulia, it's lacking some basic need for existence, because everything exists in relationship. And I'm going to go deeper into that. So to be called Chulia, it's not prerogative at all, but it does talk about a very liminal space. So I think that we need to be very clear about that too, as well here. So you see here that as they're describing at Machutara and Akiwa, you see a double sound, a single sound, a dense mixed sound, a clear pure sound, a broad fat sound, a thin sound, an energized brightened sound with a weak sound, a sound that is continuous, the other one is continuous. But one might have a positive aesthetics, the other one might be more negative, the one is in tune, the other one is out of tune. But at the end of the day, nevertheless, in the music, within the melody, both of them enter in relationship. And they describe it as janantin. Now, janantin is something extremely interesting in Quechua. It means that you have an opposite complementarity relationship. Now, why is that so important? We're going to see a little later in the presentation. So despite what you might perceive as negative descriptions, I would say more than negative are more unique characteristics that in certain spaces become the pair, the opposite pair that creates a beautiful something. All right, so I'm gonna keep moving. In order to understand that jananti, that pairing that takes place, I'm gonna have to go back, way back, and discuss Indian cosmology, or a very broad philosophical description of Indian metaphysics. And we're going to start on the origins of how existence came to be, because I think it's extremely important that we do that in order to understand how beingness functions, how a human is understood, or more than a human, a being is understood, and how relationships constitute beingness. So therefore, how, if relationships constitute beingness, how can you talk about gender in that with a relational ontology? So that's stake here. So bear with me. The first thing I'm going to refer is that in the Andes, existence doesn't come out of nothing. There is not such a thing as a creation ex nihilo. Everything already existed, but it was so chaotic, so full, so amazing, and that it wasn't organized. So it was so much that it was almost nothing, but it was there. There was something so big that it was so full that it was almost nothing. And usually the origin is as a metaphor becomes water. And water is a very strong female component. Extreme is a female component. So you see this development of how, or the ordering of cosmos takes place coming out of water, out of a female imagery here. You will see how is this connected to what I was just describing a little earlier. Now here, and this is where it becomes fascinating, as they begin to unfold not only the cosmos or the whole of existence, the divinity also becomes to be organized and comes into more beingness as well. You do not have a differentiation between creation here and the divinity here. No, it is evolving together. And in this area, I want to show you, I want you to pay attention to the way this imagery here, which is ancient. This is even pre-Inca period. It's one of the most oldest graphics across the Andes that exist. I also want you to look at the picture here. And I wanted to pay attention that we are looking at water, that we are looking at light, and therefore, what we are looking at here is what I call a plurisingularity, in the sense that that totality begins to unfold, but it's not really fully differentiated yet. Why is not? Why is the case? Because as there's unfolding and light is beginning to come to being, the over against background is the water, but the water is understood as a mother. So roles are here. We're not talking about something that exists and then relates. We're talking about how relationships takes place, and that explains your existence, relational ontologies. So in this plurisingularity, this deity, so to speak, that emerges is called Pachacamac in the northern part of Peru, and in the lower part of Peru and what is Bolivia and so forth, we talk about Huiracucha or Huiracocha. Cocha is water, and Huira is more like a fat or the foam. So something is emerging and is connected to the light. But you do not have a fully differentiation enough for a full beingness. Now, then, if that is the case, how do we explain the conception of of some scholars talking about the presence of a third gender subjects in the Andes? And I think before I'm gonna go here, let me jump to my next slide here. Here you begin to see the dual complementarity that needs to emerge. You cannot have existence unless you have somebody that is the same as you. And if I have to use Western terms, I would say same nature, but it's just the opposite of you. And that becomes something more like this. So here you have that first plurisingularity that it is and it's not, because it's not differentiated. And then because of that relationship, that tension that exists in the relationship, something happens. And that relationship, that space is what allows them to differentiate. And symbolically, you see that as the sun and the moon the Inca and the Colla, the male and the female, and the dual complementarities, the pair, the Chachawarmi, the Cariwarmi, that is described as the fundamental ontological place of existence in the Andes. Yet, what is not being considered is that because of that relationship and that tension and that differentiation that needs to exist, something happens in the middle. Now, given that we are talking among religious scholars and theologians, I'm sure many of you are going to the Trinity. Something like that, because you do have something that is more a third something that could be understood as in something of a relationship. Without the relationship and that differentiation, existence cannot happen. Now, I'm gonna go back to the prior slides here, and I wanna start looking. So if that is the case, can we really say that we have a third gender? And if so, how? So let me talk about this part. I'm gonna read from Santa Cruz Pachacutec. He is an indigenous chronicler, and he has one of the most interesting treaties at that time. So he says, the chieftains and settlers from Carabaya bring a chuki chinchay. I will tell you in a minute what a chuki chinchay is. An animal painted in all colors. They say that it was the apple or the deity of the jaguar, under whose protection they were the hermaphrodites or Indians of two genders. So now you already have some trying to describe something here. How were non-gender conforming people fit into this reality? If what we are describing here is that in order to understand what a person is, comes from the relationship, by functions, not by your nature. See the difference here? They're more interested of your role or who you are based on their functions that you play in society. So conceptions of gender comes within this larger understanding of who does what. And I will give you more contemporary examples. But here, they're already assuming that they are people with two genders. Now, what is this animal and why is that interesting, connected to cosmology? First is that they're talking about a wild cat, because in the Andes at that time, there were no jaguars. So they were cats, wild cats. That's the image that you see there. And second, if it's connected to that temple that is related to water, because, and this is why this is an interesting image. You see here, it is a deity of the water. The titi, it means cat. So you see here that you see people non-conforming gender people are placed in a liminal space, in the sense that they are not fully differentiated, because fully differentiated, you need the ends of the spectrum of a male and a female, but they have a very unique place. And at the end, so because of the uniqueness, I'm not quite sure if we can talk about a third gender per se, but it's definitely something that is very unique. And because of that uniqueness, they play an extremely important religious role and value. Another aspect here that is important to consider is that what now we might consider things that are too different or anomalies, in the Andes, in many places are considered as gifts from Creator, something that is very unique, something that is a gift. So that's why I think this larger understanding of Indian cosmology helps you see to explain why you saw many, especially males, serving in temples, having priestly roles. And you can also see why the Spaniards will have that horrific ways to describe and basically destroy their rightful space in that society. So let's see here. The other part here that I want to share that I think is important is that as the differentiation takes place, I'm going back to cosmology again, as the differentiation takes place with the third included, that whatever third is, then the creation unfolds out of the depths of that divinity, and creation itself becomes complementary dual relationships. And that's why you see again the statements that in everything comes in pairs. That in the Andes you have male and female, chacha, warmi, kari, warmi, night, day, sun, moon, and so forth, and so forth. But what I will also argue is that it's not as simple as they say, because there's always this third space or this fifth space sometimes that becomes very liminal but extremely important for balance. I'm gonna also explain how the tensions that we see in today's efforts to craft dignified spaces in what still is, and in many areas, a very a machista space, unfortunately, is that. But what I've seen, not only through experience, but also through anthropological works, is that there is an openness and many times tolerance for non-gender conforming people. But when things get difficult, it's precisely when they move into the space of roles. Because again, in order to understand genders more than nature, which is where traditionally that the conceptions of gender were constructed, here what we have are functions. And it's the differentiation that creates the relationship. And so therefore, if you have somebody who is not conforming to roles, or there's not a specific, it's clear where do they fit, then creates problems in communities. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you have a man that will not marry, and there is a lot of pressure to get married because forming a stable relationship with the opposite, somebody from the opposite sex, constitutes maturity. But they will be allowed, there will be allowed, and there are spaces for them to hold communal roles of leadership. However, they need, when they are in these roles, when there is a public spaces, when they need to represent their authority, they always have to come with a woman, whether that is a mother or is a sister. They cannot show by themselves. So I guess what we're seeing here is that there is this much broader spaces, spectrums of gender identities, and that there is enough evidence to show us that in the Indian region, non-gender conforming people had a space, and they were respected. and they were mostly moved into leadership through religious service. And today we still see spaces of leadership, and unfortunately, a lot of the violence against them has come as effects of colonization. And I'm going to stop there because I'm sure there are going to be questions.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Those of us who are here, please join me in giving a round of applause to Dr. Titizano. Thank you so much for the presentation. And yeah, I'm going to open up for some questions. I will actually take the liberty of asking the first couple, if you don't mind me. I am interested in the initial observation that you made about the presence of these so-called prostitutes, sodomites in the temple. Obviously, from the Christian framework, that we are unfortunately too used to a dichotomy between the sexual and the sacred, right? A dichotomy that seems to not have been, as or present in the same way in the traditions of the Andes. So I was wondering if you can speak a little bit more about that. Obviously, in Christianity, for those of us who perhaps need a little bit of a background, we have a tradition which I personally consider unfortunate, whereby we subjugate the body to the spirit. The sexual is of a second order to what is the spiritual, and here we have theologies about sexual, like chastity, etc. This idea that we're going to dominate the body and the sexual for the sake of the spirit, right? And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the presence at the temple.
I think something interesting to notice here is that those categories of chastity, for example, and or we apply to women, for example, that was not something that is present. Actually, for women to come to a marriage and not have been sexually active, the partner might wonder what's wrong. Why haven't you? Why is that you didn't have those relationships? So that is an imposition. So it makes a lot of sense that you will have sacred spaces where they are performing in different roles. Now, how was sexuality part of the rituals? It's not very clear, to be honest with you. I haven't found enough studies to say this is how it needed to be. But there is an indication that actually it was part of the rituals or the life that took place within the spaces. Yeah, there you go. I think that is a fair way to describe it. And we also see in ways of dances where it becomes very sexual, and it is part of acknowledging that sexuality is actually the way in which creation takes place. So also this is very important. Perhaps gives us a little peeks into this, that when they're describing the differentiation in the among deities, you're also going to see and use very sexual terminology. So there is no reason for us to imagine that sexuality was not very much part of rituals and took place in temples. And with all the different gender identities that was present there.
Thank you. And my other question, and then I'll turn it over to some folks. This is actually, I'm bringing in my class. In my class, we were talking about the concept of gender complementarity and how it's served as really a bedrock for a lot of Christian theology on sexuality. Of course, Catholic tradition has the idea of the natural law, but also we have gender complementary directly in the Bible, especially in Genesis, male and female, God created them, etc. So the gender complementarity question is there. And one of the questions that we have wrestled with in some of my classes is, can you really promote a concept of gender inclusivity while also holding on to the notion of gender complementarity, specifically a biological gender complementarity? We're talking about penis and vagina biologically, right? So this is not so much like me and my same-sex partner complement each other in so many ways. So the biological, physiological complementarity, quote unquote. So my question is, where's the lesson here? Because it seems like the tradition that you are describing has done a little bit of both, right? Where they maintain a gender complementarity notion, yet at the same time also make room for what I'm going to use the word, the queerness, right? The not fitting in, right? That'll be my word. But so I was wondering if you can just now perhaps become a little bit more prescribe a little bit to those of us who operate within a Christian tradition. What can we learn from this, or how do you make sense of this, and where's the lesson here for our contemporary tradition?
The first thing I think we need to do is understand how a being comes to exist. A being comes to exist through relationships. This is very different than something that exists and then enters into a relationship. So the relationship constitutes beingness. That's one of the first things. Because of that, what you see then, it's more about how the opposite of you, which in this case, if we are going to talk about a male and a female, how that opposite and how they relate to each other creates their existence as such. And it also happens with a larger community as well. So you don't understand the person on its own, or you not only have a couple and there's no space. Without the relationship, there is no couple. So there is always a third included somehow because of that relationship, if that makes sense. And if you have that relationship, then these complementary opposites become the borders of a much larger spectrum of relationalities. And because of that larger space of relationalities, you do have a space for queerness in whichever different ways it appears. So yes, there is this space for a lot of more diversity within these larger things. So the only thing I will be careful is to assume that you have a third gender per se, because claiming a third gender in a way assumes an substantive of ontology of being, which is not the case here. Instead, you have much more space of defining who you are based on the kind of relationships you perform, for lack of a better term, and with somebody else. So you can have a machutara and a kewatara. Because of the relationship and different spaces in which makes sense. So yeah, there you go. It's just that we are entering a very different, and unfortunately we are using the same terminology, but I just want to make sure that people understand this is nothing to do with natural law to begin with. And actually there is debates in the Andes about that. Where do we go? Because there is conceptions of natural law in several other indigenous communities, and there is a space for natural law, but their natural law is not the same Aristotelian, domestic natural law. It's a very different one. But the question is, do we want to go to biology and how certain animals behave as a way to say this is how nature works, so therefore? And the answer is no. No, that will not be advisable. Instead, it's better to understand this in a much larger understanding of relationships and how you as a person become a person in the relationships, and that's also that doesn't put a pressure on you to say this is what I am, because that's just based on what I am. I am this because I am relationship with you, and it might shift and give you spaces to be a lot of more different things.
Thank you.
I hope I answered your question.
That is very, very insightful. Thank you. We were talking today in my class about social constructionism, and it seems like this is a form of being in relationship. The relationship precedes the being. There's not this essence that exists before the relationship. So that I appreciate that. Opening up for questions. We have about 9 more minutes. Kathleen, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. First of all, I just want to clarify, there's no deity involved in this, right? It's pure organic, natural formation, right? I mean, in this.
What do you mean? Say more about
that. There wasn't a deity that separated the light from the water. The water was feminine. You said that was the first principle, and then there was this kind of light, and something happens that forms a relationship, and the relationship seems to the duality. You could say it a duality, or it seems to be moving into relationship.
Yeah, you don't have a pre-existing deity. That's
you
for
don't
sure.
have a pre-existing. Okay, that's what I okay. So that's interesting to me, because I'm very interested in the Darwin phenomena, which doesn't have a pre-existing deity, but doesn't exclude a deity either. And then the third quality is kind of, is it like a kind of synthesis of the duality? And I'm thinking, I'm using Marx's terminology, but there's a kind of synthesis there that creates its own sense of entity.
No, it's not. That's why I am and to talk about a third gender in the Andes. The third itself, this is not thesis, antithesis, and a synthesis. You don't get that.
Okay, all right.
This is not Hegelian. What you see here is the relationship, and the relationship having this possibility of a spaciousness, and that relationship is in a way what creates the two different opposites of that dual complementarity.
Okay, all right. Well, that it still leaves sort of an openness for, as you say, a sort of an openness for a thirdness of some kind, or something that isn't either one or the other. It seems to me. I don't know.
It does, but it does not. But you cannot claim an identity out of that.
I hear you. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Professor, a question, if I might. So, as you well know, in North American context, there are these attempts being made by indigenous groups, some of which feel that the understanding of a two-spirit or Burdash tradition, a Europeanized term, was lost and destroyed by the colonizers, and an attempt made to rediscover or recreate that. I'm thinking also of like the Muxe in central Mexico. Are there contemporary movements in Andean cultures to rescue's not the word, but to bring back or to try to, discover and relive into, if that makes sense, a pre-Spanish understanding of gender?
Very much so. The reclaiming is the right term. Thank you, Aish. Here, so first, the term two-spirit is a very recent terminology. Again, trying to find words within a much larger colonial substance metaphysics to explain the existence of these differentiations. Very much so. There is this movement, and as I mentioned at the beginning, there is a lot of tension within indigenous movements where there is many times a very essentialist understanding of Indian spirituality, Indian cosmology, that negates the existence of those third spaces. And that's what you also see going deeper into understanding language. And that's why it's extremely important, the recovery and the maintenance of language. Language creates existence.
Yeah.
So you see them going back and doing a lot of etymological work to figure out where is this term coming from, how was this used, how is in textiles being used, and music. So you can have different places where you can go and see. We can begin to uncover, recover, uncover things that were pushed to the side. But it is very contested, very contested.
Thank you.
Amazing. We perhaps have time for one more question. All right. Well, if we have no other questions, I want to again thank you, Dr. Cecilia Titizano, for joining us today. Thank you for the incredible presentation and the insights. As the coordinator of the Latinx Roundtable, this year, the theme really has been identity. And so how to wrestle with that. Of course, some claiming an identity in an essentialist term and in an essentialist way, and others not so much. When I'm thinking about our Latinidad and our heritage and our indigenous heritage, obviously my mind went straight to you and your work. And like you said, this is really only one example of a way in which we can really harvest and reclaim. I'm going to use that word again, reclaim some of the ancient wisdom that many of us have. I'm Puerto Rican, so this is a Taino background, and has a completely different understanding of all of gender, right, and sexuality. And to me, it's just fascinating to just see within our indigenous heritage the incredible diversity that is there. So thank you for your incredible presentation. I hope you're having a wonderful semester, and I thank you. I thank you very much for taking some time in your very busy schedule to be with us at CLGS. I also want to thank
pleasure. Yes.
Thank you. I want to thank all of our attendees here and online. And I'm going to turn it over to Bernie, who has some closing announcements and some of the additional events that CLGS is putting on before adjourning.
Yeah, thank you again, Professor Titizano. This Thursday, we have one of our sacred text workshops, and this will be with Reverends Lauren Bennett and Jacob Hero Shaw, talking about preaching from the Easter through the Pentecost season. That's this Thursday. And then next Thursday, our African American Roundtable is featuring Jay Davis, who will be speaking on reimagining hope, Black trans queer futures in a world that tries to erase us. So please join us for one or both of those, and check out our website as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Schlager. Thank you, Dr. Titizano. Thank you, all attendees, and have a great rest of your day.